do more damage throwing them around, trying to make them do it, than the benefit that there is to be gained for it. But if you kind of repetition, they'll eventually get into the habit of doing it.
Do you want to introduce Vance real quick?
So hold on, Paige. Just so you guys know, Vance to the right of me works at in Brennan Training Center, so Stone Street, where Puka is. So Vance has kind of been in charge of managing Puka thus far since he through the breaking process and to his most recent first breeze happened last week. So any Puka questions, Vance will be the guy for you to ask him to.
Transition of horses that we saw today who were maybe a little skittish, very aware that they were strangers. Right? How do you transition? What's the process to move them to feel comfortable at the Derby, at Saratoga? Like with that environment that's in floor, how do you get the horse to not like freak out?
A lot of it is maturity, and like when Vance has them or we have them, and you're always trying to keep horses comfortable and keep them, build their confidence. We can't make them any faster than they are, but what we can do is we can give them the tools mentally to be as good as they are. So, speaking for us, all of our horses go in company, and and I don't know if you've been involved in any that have come through Wavertree, but at the end of each day when they finish their work, we'll jog them in figure eights, and we'll make every horse take a turn in front. And some of them are more confident and it comes naturally to them. Some of them get out there and they're all scared. They're like, oh my goodness. But you never force that on them. You keep introducing them to them, but if they don't want to be there, you kind of leave them alone, and eventually they'll come to it. The decisions that we'll make at Wavertree or Vance and will make at Stone Street is when they're ready to leave, and a lot of that is based on their mental maturity. And when they go into different racetracks, you know what I mean. Baffert has, I'll send them to Los Alamitos usually to start with. They'll go to Mike Marlowe, and Mike will sort of transition them into Bob's way of doing things, to changing feed, how Bob trains, and then he'll work with them for a couple of months, and then he'll get them to where he says to Bob, okay, this one's ready to go to Santa Anita. So there's nothing specific you can do, but like I said, the main thing to do is always keep them confident. Never get them you try not to put them in situations where they're stressed or overtaxed. And if you allow them to mature, they're like little kids, right? And, if you try and force something on them, they'll push back. But if you pretend it was their idea, they're usually really good at it.
And I'll just add something there from the racetrack standpoint, not that I'm a trainer by any means, but you see a lot of this still continue when they get to the racetrack. And a perfect example I'll use is Richard Mandela, of how he uses paddock schooling and continuing to always make the horses feel comfortable in the paddock. Even after training, he a lot of times schedules his horses to be on the track where they can make sure when they're done training, they go and take that walk through the paddock. But they're always confident there that on race day, it's no big deal with them, because we always talk about horses exerting wasted energy. And a lot of times you'll see that happen in the paddock and the crowd being around there. And so we do that in the mornings in a quiet atmosphere, and then build them up to do that then during the races, during schooling, during the races. And that's just a continued evolution of building their confidence from that way.
Okay, this is Vance. This is a question for you. Since you've got 2024, can you give some insight into the strength you've seen with Puka, and also maybe some of the weaknesses or areas that he focused?
Honestly, he's pretty straightforward. We had Good Magic as a yearling as well. Barbara Banky bred Good Magic, and which she sold half to E5, and then he came to the farm to be broke, prepped to go to the races. So to me, he's not unlike Good Magic. There's a lot about him. There's a lot about him that's like Good Magic. If anything, I would say he's actually a little bit more forward, a little more of him than Good Magic was at this stage of his 2-year-old year. So weaknesses, I mean, you know, he breezed his first quarter the other day. I mean, there's nothing, I there's nothing about him that I would say, you know, honestly, I think you just need to point him towards the winner's circle. You know, I mean, you know, he's not trying to put any more pressure on him than he already has. But like he's pretty straightforward. So I don't really see a whole lot of weaknesses in it.
Hello. Um, I guess just a general, maybe for Joe, what factors do you guys consider when you're deciding which horse goes to what trainer?
Great question. I think it's a lot about knowing their program, the trainer's program that they're going to, and I use it as a repetitive explanation, but Bob Baffert is a trainer that, you know, I would say trains harder and tougher on the horses on a regular basis, and that's why his horses, when they show up on entry day, or not entry day, but on race day, they usually come with their best, and they're fit and ready to run. So they go through a more demanding process where they're not being given races to run into fitness. That all happens in the mornings. So with a barn like that, it was the same way with Mr. Lucas. Of finding a horse that, one, we focused on good bone with a horse and being correct, and something that we thought could just really stand up to the pressure that they're withholding. There are certain trainers that we think have more, you know, turf-centric benefits to their program, and we'll do that, and those are a lot more straightforward. But I would say the Mr. Lucases of the world and Mr. Baffert, those are the two that I think take the most scrutiny of criticizing horses when you're looking at them. And then some things work naturally. You find a partner, you like the horse, and you take the chance. Those are the easy ones. But I would say through and throughout, you're just focusing on conformation and how they're made to go into that program.
Thank you again. Are there certain jockeys that you guys point toward in each of the circuits, would be the West Coast, East Coast?
Yes and no. I mean, we work with a lot of different trainers. Every trainer has their relationships with jockeys that are in their barns. So we definitely try not to overstep in that area in certain means. But of course, if we can get a Flavian Prater and Irad Ortiz, are we going to be upset? Absolutely not. But we're certainly not going to take someone off that hasn't done a poor job or done anything, to be taken off for that reason. So a lot of that we leave up to the trainers.
This kind of piggybacks on what we just talked about. Who actually determines whether or not the jockey's going to make or break the horse? We know some jockeys are more aggressive than others more like that. You listen to them talk, someone who says that they let the horse run the race, the other one's steer the horse, the other one's aggressive on the horse. How does that work?
And just in our determination of what jockeys we use, that's what that's ultimately going to. It's a conversation. I'll bring up a horse by the name of Raging Inferno that we have in California. He's run twice, hasn't done anything by any means of any serious running in those two races, but we knew he was going to need it in just development. He's recently gelded. He's a horse that we think needs to be involved in the race early, right? So that's a perfect example where we're not going to find a finesse jockey. We're going to find someone that's a little more on the aggressive side, try to get him out of the gate, put him in the race early on, and go that route. And there's a handful of jockeys in each jurisdiction that kind of fit that bill. And then between trainer and us that we ultimately decide who we're going to go with.
When you breeze horses in the morning, why do you only breeze them with two? Why don't you make it more like what they do in, the actual race? Why is there 3 or 4 horses coming up behind them so that they get used to that kind of environment?
I'll let the trainers talk about this, but a few things I think that I can just touch on is the mornings are not meant to be race day situations. You want to simulate it in certain ways, but if they were running a race every 7 days or race-like atmosphere, that's going to take a toll on them physically and mentally. And then I'll toss to Kieran and Vance if they got anything to really add there.
So most of us will work horses. They'll work in pairs because breeze day is when you're trying to move them to the next level, right? You're trying to work on their fitness, their maturity. You're trying to move them forward. You know, if you try and incorporate too much into it, then you like anything in life you do, the more you try and do, the less you accomplish. And a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, like putting horses, in groups of 3 and 4 in behind, that's actually done on non-breeze days. And, if you watch, when we get done training, we'll make them walk in a straight line, with a group of 8 or something, and, we tell the riders, make them bang, bang together and hit one another. But, if you try and do that on a regular breeze day and the horse gets scared or intimidated, then the whole breeze is blown and you lose it. So you try and incorporate all those things in, and, on days that are less important. And, again, it gets back to the confidence factor. And you got to be very careful never to overtax them. You always want to keep pushing them and bringing them forward, but you don't ever want to put them in a situation when they're scared. And once you get them scared or frightened of something, then the battle is lost. And, it's all about building their confidence. And,
So Mike, if I had that, just to add to that, it's not necessary. Like, when we're putting them in company, when we're doing the breeze list the day before, when we're setting it up, we're trying to pair the horses up that best suit each other, that go well together, that would go well together. Distance, the type of horses that they are, where their fitness level is. So, to put them, now there are times where, we may wind up with a straggler, or one straggler, that would go better with 2 other horses. So we have done that for the breezing in threes. I've never done it in fours, where they're doing it in threes. But I mean, really, it's not necessary for what we're doing to try and get them to a race. It's just not necessary, in my opinion.
So, this morning Joe, when you were discussing the future of racing, particularly in California, we talked about purses, numbers of foals, the presence of casinos or lack thereof, and what that portends for the future of racing. I started to think about the folks that are here and the demographics of the My Racehorse micro shareholder base. What is it? Does it skew heavily to the 50 and over range? And what are we doing to try to attract younger people to the industry?
It's a great question. I'm going to repeat kind of the synopsis of the question for those that are tuning in online. Just talking about future of racing as a whole, the younger generation in racing, and some purse structure. Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm 31, and kind of devoted my life to horse racing. So it's scary at times to say, what's the future of horse racing in 20 years? Because at this point, I don't really know anything else. And it, for whatever reason is of what doesn't attract the younger generation, I still haven't figured out the answer, even with my friends. I try to get more friends to come out to the races on a regular basis. Would casinos change that in California? I don't think that's the answer for getting the younger generation is, but I think it's certainly a Band-Aid or for sure. I mean, we've seen all the benefits that it's done in Kentucky, but I think Kieran and Vance can talk about this, but your livelihood in horse racing, especially when you're a caretaker of horses, is a very tough life, and it's a 24/7 life. You don't get holidays off because you still got to take care of the horses. And I think that's a lot for maybe certain people in the younger generation, that it doesn't attract them from that standpoint. And maybe they'll tune in once every blue moon, but it's not an everyday lifestyle. I'll say the lifestyle they live, we live, horse racing turns into your lifestyle, not your job. So I know I was pretty vague there in the answer, but that's kind of, I wish I knew the answer to it, but it's certainly a problem. Yes.
I would say that everybody talks about getting the younger generation involved. You know what I mean? As fans. And the thing about it is I think horse racing is almost like golf, right? When you're in your 20s, it's really not that exciting, right? Because they're surfing, they're climbing mountains, they're skiing. When you're 50, that ski slope don't look quite as exciting, right? And all of a sudden, tuning into horse racing does have its appeal, right? You know what I mean? Because I do believe that we get hung up on this younger generation in terms of fans. But I don't think we're ever going to get a bunch of teenagers who think an afternoon at the racetrack is the most exciting thing they could ever do. But like I say, what we do need to do is produce a product that, when people get, to our stage in life, and you know what I mean, where you can buy a micro share and then all of a sudden you can be involved in horse racing, that it does have its appeal, right? I'm not a huge fan of casinos propping up horse racing because I think that we got to learn to stand on our own 2 feet. Obviously the money is great, but everywhere it's been temporary. And so, not to stroke any egos here, but I think that my racehorse is one of the greatest vehicles we as an industry have to promote our sport, because what they do in terms of giving you guys access, showing you how the horses evolve from their yearling year through their 2-year-old year, giving you, insights into what happens in the barns on a day-to-day basis. That's the sort of thing that's going to generate fans for us. And again, I don't think it's going to be a bunch of 18-year-olds, but I do believe that, no one ever was going to say this about you and anything else, but you are the future of racing. But that's what it is. I mean, this is the demographic that we want involved going forward, because you know what I mean? It is a great afternoon out, especially if you have one in and you have a rooting interest. It is a great afternoon. So, this is what we need to focus on more than, like I say, we're chasing something that we're never going to get.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Kahn from Denver, Colorado. And again, we appreciate you putting this on, the showcase on, and super awesome opportunity. My question is, I'd like to understand the road to a Triple Crown race. I mean, I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I'm a shareholder. I want to see if I can be part of a big race like that. But starting now over the next year, what does the road look like for a horse? How many races do they race? What are the points system? How does that all work to the point where you can say, yes, this horse is ready for one of those big races?
I think I can tackle this for the most part. So I mean, the process starts now, right? Because you're on a, repeat the question, sorry. For those online, the question is, what does the journey look like for a horse to get on the Triple Crown trail, and what does it take to compete in one? So, the horse's career starts now. This whole breaking process is very crucial for a horse's future. Now, I kind of talked a lot about it during some of the other Q&As, but it's also from a management standpoint, you're on a timeline and you got to map out a horse's campaign, because if they went right into the track in April and to expect them to compete in the first Saturday, May in the Kentucky Derby, it's a very hard task to do. So for me, in a perfect world, if I had a horse debut at the right time to make a Triple Crown run, I'd be hoping my horse started September 1 or October 1, and that kind of gives you a 6-month span into that period. Other people will disagree. From our experience with my racehorse, we've had 2 specific horses. One was Seize the Gray, obviously, that I'll get into, but another one was a horse by the name of In Due Time, and he had debuted at Monmouth Park in July, which is earlier than I just said. We were forced to send the horse to the sidelines because of something that could have been an issue. So he ended up having to get 60 days off and made his return in January at Gulfstream Park in a 1-turn mile allowance race. And that was kind of his coming out party, his breakout party, that then put him on the Triple Crown Trail, ran in the Fountain of Youth. And those are the races by February. If you need to start earning points, That's kind of when you want to be in the mix in all the preps. Today's Risen Star Day at Fairgrounds. Those are the races you need to compete in to get it. Each month that goes by, February, March, April, the point systems go up. So if you win one of the big preps, you might only need to win one of those races, but on some of the other ones, you could run second, and still get into the Derby. So I think every horse's path is different. Seize the Gray was a very unique one where we knew if he was going to make the Triple Crown Trail, because he had debuted at Ellis Park in June, right before the Saratoga meet started. So he had run 4 times. By the time we had given him a break, we gave him only 30 days off, and we were very tactical of our plan of how much time he got off to refresh him for it. And that allowed him to come back in March at Oaklawn Park and put himself in the mix. He didn't make the Derby, but we tried, and then ultimately winning the Preakness. So there's a lot of different routes you can go on it, but you need to have a fresh animal at the end of the day. The first quarter of the year is the most crucial time for that horse to earn points and be in the races that matter.
So just to add to that, for anybody that's really interested in the point system, you can go on Churchill's website and it'll give you every race listed and how much the points are for that race.
Yeah.
What it takes to get into the consecutive.
And then also same thing, there's like a list online for Breeders' Cup races, like all the preps throughout the year that you would have to win to have a win in your in to get in. All that stuff you could find on the Breeders' Cup website too throughout the year.
Right, we kind of touched on this a little bit before, but even prior to that, I'm thinking on a personal level, how and why, because like you said, talking about getting kids interested in the sport, how and why did each of you get involved in horse racing?
I needed a job. Lack of education. And, I mean, that's basically, look, I mean, well, I'm sure we're all going to be the same way. I mean, look, I grew up, on a horse farm in Ireland. And I came out of school and, I was going to do a gap year, and my mother told me no, I wasn't. I was going to get a job. The only job I could get was with horses. And I'd never done anything else. And so it's been good to me.
And then just to repeat the question for the listeners, what got us into horse racing individually? Grew up, my dad was a small owner, small breeder in Southern California. Every weekend consisted being at Santa Anita, summers at Del Mar. Fell in love with the animal. When college and baseball were over, I said, what do I do now? And started hot walking and grooming on the backside. And that eventually mindset of wanting to possibly become a trainer, and my racehorse came along, and I've been with them now 8 years.
I think the common root we could all agree on up here is you fall in love with the horse itself at some point, and that's kind of where your career would start in it. I was lucky enough to be in barns at the racetrack before I could walk, and started hot walking when I was 7, 8 years old. Groomed, was a foreman assistant, trained on my own, and kind of followed that route through it. But yeah, it all, and it goes for all you too. At some point, you fell in love with the animal. And that led to you either in other equestrian disciplines or deciding to buy a share with my racehorse. So the common root there is just the love for the horse.
Same here. My grandfather did it, my father did it. But my father's side of the family, most of everybody there learned how to muck stalls at one stage or another. And just love the horse. I feel blessed that I get to do what I do. That's honestly, I've worked with some really, really, really nice horses over the years, and just very lucky to have that opportunity. But it definitely, it's the horses. There's no doubt about it.
So, especially a few years ago, somebody asked you who your favorite horse was. And you directly answered, you started talking about Seize the Gray. So who's your favorite horse this year?
Hold on, repeating the question. It's to Kieran Dunn of last year. He gave out his favorite horse. Who's his favorite horse this year?
No pressure.
It's actually one I'm going to sell in March. that looks like a future my racer
Yeah.
all the way. You know, look, it's really hard. I mean, you know, Joe or Maddie mentioned earlier that Elevate, when she was a yearling, I absolutely loved her. And I was the underbidder on her at the sale, and that was the most I bid on a horse all year. Um, you know, and I still love her. You know, she's beautiful. She moves good. She's a little quirky, but that probably comes with the sex. But and then you know, if you were to put a gun to my head, it would be bolt type. But
The
then if you
partner would
wanted me
kill
to
you if you
pick my
said
favorite
otherwise.
chestnut, it would be the
Warranted.
Justified Colt, yeah. And my favorite dark bay with a white face is the Jack Christopher. And my favorite Uncle Mo filly is, you know, someone said it, like you said, that I said Steve the Gray was my favorite, but someone else said earlier I didn't really like him. So if I say it enough, I'm enough of everything, I'm going to be right.
Yeah.
So each tour we say something different.
Question here, Captain. If I understand correctly, the 2-year-old sales are coming up, and if you can speak from my racehorse perspective, contrast that, say from purchasing a yearling, when horses are under your control and follow care regimen and so forth, what's the different considerations you're looking at? 2-year-old when the horses have not been in your control?
Can I answer that one?
Time to make necessary adjustments or those kind of things?
Yeah, good question. The question was pretty much the different process of buying 2-year-olds, since we cannot manage the whole breaking process and everything like that like we can with yearlings, and what goes into that with 2-year-olds. Got to be selective is number one. And number two, I think the 2-year-old sales do give a lot of added advantages to buyers, though, because of what you get to see, right? We get to come here in 2 weeks and watch every horse breeze. Now, I always say it, they're intended to look the best they're ever going to look that day, right? That's their job. At the end of the day, they want them to look as good as possible that day. So being able to see how they handle the breeze, how they come out of it, and everything like that, and that's why we'll have 4 people on the grounds that we're trying to look at these horses as soon as possible, one outside of a breeze, and see how they respond over a few days. And I think as we've been shopping these sales long enough, we know certain routines of how horses are prepped and everything like that. And Kieran would, I'm sure, tell you his program is slightly different for the horses that he's training for us for my racehorse and the horses that he has to sell in the sale, right? Because they have to breeze in 2 weeks. His March horses have to breeze an eighth of a mile pretty quick here. So that's his job, is to do that. But at the same time, a lot of his sale horses go through a lot of the same preparation, right? All those videos, if you see those horses in the grass, they're still going through all that education, which is important, and we know that because we've got to witness it firsthand. So it's learning a lot more about consigners and their program, and partly I'd say why we have some horses elsewhere as well. As you learn programs like that, you see what they do, build relationships and trust. Sometimes you get burned at the end of the day, and sometimes after you get burned, you don't go back to the well thinking it's going to be different the next time. So I'd say that's all part of, our process internally. Kieran has anything to add? Feel free.
I would be a big proponent of buying from the 2-year-old sales.
I agree.
I think it's very important. No, look, I mean, my perspective is a little different, and I'm a firm believer that young horses need to move forward. And it's interesting to hear Vance say how Puka had his first breeze last week. And I think that's great. In a lot of environments, they'd be like, oh no, it's too early, it's too early. There's very few kids who sit out sports in high school who go on to play pro. And So that early education is very important. And like I say, I think it's, what you get with the 2-year-old sales is you get a more mature physical and mental prospect. Because like I say, and at the end of the day, the ones who can handle that process, they don't show up at the 2-year-old sales. We end up not selling them in March, we sell them in June because they sort themselves out. And years ago, OBS used to have a sale, Super Bowl weekend in Miami, and it produced the highest ratio of stakes winners to any sale ever anywhere. And it was because the ones who pushed themselves forward to go there, they were the early maturing, very athletic forward horses. So from my perspective, I think that, look, Baffert's had so much success from the 2-year-old sales, and I think he's one of the guys that recognizes it. We've kind of gotten away in horse racing we've gotten a little namby-pamby, in my opinion, to where, a two-year-old racing, we'll run them in the fall. Not too long ago, all the good horses, a horse like Summer Squall, Ryan, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. Summer Squall won the Preakness, was a very good horse. He broke his maiden at Keeneland going 4.5 furlongs in April. So I think that early training stands to them going forward. Like Joe said, you can come in here and you can actually get to see it perform on the racetrack. When these guys are at the sales and they're trying to pick out a racehorse as a yearling, they get a 50-foot walk, and that's what they've got to judge it on. Whereas you get to see a lot more, and what you don't get at the 2-year-old sales a lot of times is the pedigree. And that would be the big drawback from your point of view. It's hard to buy a Seize the Grey type of horse with that pedigree at the 2-year-old sales because they're just not there, and because we don't get to buy them to reoffer them.
Okay, Joe and Karen, Joe, what are we looking at on this next sale in a couple of weeks? I asked Karen who he liked, he has quite a few that he's offering, maybe a Cyberman?
We're looking for the fastest one.
Yeah. How about the McKinsey though, Karen? How do you like that one?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Look, yeah, that's a hard question for me because I'm selling them, so I like them all. The Mackenzie is probably a later mature, and he's more of a 3-year-old type. He's actually one that we're kind of on the fence about whether we're even going to bring him over here next week. He might end up going in April instead if he needs an extra 30 days. Physically he's a nice horse. Whether he's ready to go zip just now, I don't know. It's like anything else. It's like what Joe said is true. He said it kind of facetiously. He's looking for the fastest one. But at the end of the day, they're the ones. It's a time trial based sale. So, we sometimes as consigners want to get a little upset. Oh, he's a really nice horse. He didn't work his best. But, they're coming here to buy the fastest ones. So, you know what I mean? They'll identify. And like, Joe will speak to this maybe a little bit too, but, sometimes there's a range at the 2-year-old sales of times, if you're so far off the fastest breeze, you're probably just slow. But if you're within a certain range, but you have a pedigree that says, you want to go further rather than sprint, or, maybe the horse's action was such that, they look at it and say, this horse looks like it could go further. And, obviously a horse with a longer stride, who has to take less strides to get there, is probably going to be able to go further than a horse who's going to move his legs at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And yeah, he might go fast over 1/8 of a mile, but when you look at him, you go, yeah, he ain't going to go 1.25 miles. And so these are the things that these guys have to factor in. And,
And I think the only thing that I'll add on there is, we've bought plenty of horses some that have breezed 9-4, some that have breezed 10-2. So now if they breeze 11-2, as Kieran said, they might just be slow. But I think it's why it's so important why we come and watch them breeze. And I think going off of what Kieran kind of said, and I think it was his last question, that some of the early horses take themselves there, right? There may be a horse that goes out there and breezes 10-1, just all on his own, doing it himself, wanting to do it. you know, those are the horses that I tend to be more attracted to at the sale. Even if another one breezed 9 and 4, maybe they were asked a lot more, I want to see the one that was naturally going fast on their own. And I think that's why we've seen so much success out of the sale. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to know they can run fast, and this certainly gives us a good showcase of it.
A question on training. Yesterday I saw Miguel come out that horse that ran and won at Tampa Bay Downs. Unfortunately, about an hour later, he had given my theme music and didn't do so well. It made me think about how many people does a big time trainer really employ, and if they have an issue, maybe where the horse isn't performing as you hoped, do you change maybe the grooms or the other handlers that you have for the horse, to maybe give them a little bit different perspective? Or perhaps as an owner, you decide to change the trainers. And what does that do as far as a relationship with the trainer if you move away from them?
Yeah, just to summarize the question, when does changes happen to horse groom, hot walker, rider, trainer, if a horse is not performing well? I'll touch on a few things and then let the trainers talk as well. Yes, I would say being involved in a lot of different barns, we see simple as an exercise rider in the morning get changed. You know, we try not to change it, but if something's not working, they will absolutely change. Same thing with grooms. I think in certain cases, there are cases though where horses aren't running because they don't want to, not necessarily the groom, the rider, anything, maybe something happening. Give me my theme music's case, bought a horse coming off a win, unfortunately had to go to the sideline for as long as he did, and came back, and the lack of effort was apparent. I mean, dropping to the level that he ran at the other day and produced the same result. For me, that was the telling story. It was his day to win, getting the class relief that he did. No true excuses to not perform. So to me, to him, I think it's a lot more complex. And when I say complex, I think a lot has to do mentally with the horse and just the desire to do it. And that happens a lot more often than not. And it's very hard to keep horses in top form for a long period of time. But I'll dish it off to Kieran or Matt regarding in your barn of why you would change, or Vance.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Like, I don't necessarily know that it would be a reason for them that they're not winning. Now, with us, you know, we change riders and occasionally grooms all the time. Some grooms will get along with the horse, won't get along with the horse, and another groom would. Riders are the same thing. You know, doing a set list is it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. You're trying to match the horse to the rider, and then you know, then does it go well? You know, is there a horse for it to go in company with? You know, so like you're constantly, there's a lot of change. We have certain riders that they're breeze riders, right? And certain riders that don't get to breeze. They don't know how. So we have particular riders that breeze. So those horses, you know, and you're breezing 3-4 days a week, you know, you're going to take horses off. You're going to take them, you know, you're going to take